So I've entitled my talk this morning, Our Journey of Becoming Through the Beatitudes. I should first of all say that I'm Alice, if folks don't know me. And I guess I come to this talk with my own experience, just like if any of you were able to come and share your story, it would look something different, but I hope that it's going to be God's story of what he's done in my own life. I also come with the experience of having worked for a few years in psychiatry years ago before I had my children, and also having walked alongside and journeyed with others over the years in mentoring and pastoral care. So our journey of becoming through the Beatitudes. The level of suffering across our world and community can feel overwhelming and can invoke many questions and feelings. Heartache and pain are universal and inform our reality, woven into our life's journey. These can be experiences of loss of love, loss of ability, loss of independence, loss of opportunity. They can also be the addition of challenging things in our life, such as pain, exhaustion, responsibility, or coping with mental health challenges. My privilege this morning is to highlight the tender heart of God for us. He sees and knows each and every situation that we face. He weeps with us, and he walks alongside us in Jesus. The invitation that I see in this portion of Jesus' teaching, called the Beatitudes, is for us as individuals, all of humanity, to lean into God in our pain and find compassion, peace, rest, in a new way of being. And for us in turn, to bring these gifts of life to others. So let's read the passage together. I'm going to be covering Matthew chapter 5, verses 1 to 10. Now, when Jesus saw the crowds, he went up on a mountainside and sat down. His disciples came to him, and he began to teach them, saying, "Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. Blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the earth. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they will be filled. Blessed are the merciful, for they will be shown mercy. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they will see God. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called sons of God. Blessed are those who are persecuted because of righteousness, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven." There's so much in this passage and many different things that could be drawn out. I want to focus on what we see of Jesus' heart towards each one. His desire that we are open and real in both the limitations and the possibilities of our humanity, that both draw us to him and out of ourselves. Lives that can be fully lived through his love, gifts, and enabling. The Greek word makario, which is translated here as blessed, can also mean privileged, fortunate, to be fully satisfied, a sense of receiving God's favor regardless of circumstance. I'm also going to be using the Message Paraphrase Bible, a more figurative translation, which I find helpful here. So let's get started in verse 3. Jesus says, "You are blessed when you are at the end of your rope. With less of you, there is more of God and his rule." What does it mean to let go and to let God? Just to be clear, I understand this as Jesus saying, it's when we recognize we are at the end of our rope and allow God's love, support and rescue that we will find blessing. Not the difficult circumstance being the blessing, rather being the means through which we recognize our need for help and through which God meets us in his love and provision. During tough times in our lives, when we're exhausted and struggling to cope, we may find ourselves using phrases such as, "I just need to hang on," "I've got this," "I'm going to fight through this." We can find it so hard to stop and admit that we aren't in control of things, that if we let go, we'll fall to who knows where. But Jesus said, "Blessed is the one who, in recognizing they can't go on in their own strength, opens themselves to receive God's presence, his love, strength, peace, and rest, kingdom of heaven gifts here on earth." Jesus is inviting us to take a stance of allowing. Perhaps it can feel risky trusting him for the first time, and this is where stories from others of God's faithfulness can help build our trust. Something I've come to realize is that letting go of my tight control, handing over to God's control, is not the same as giving up. It takes a lot of emotional energy to keep holding on so tightly. And when I manage to, entrusting myself to God is incredibly freeing. Sometimes in our life, there's sudden loss or change, a stripping away of much that we hold dear. Perhaps it can be easier to let God carry us at these times. When I was 19, I received significant burns injuries in a car accident. The early days were really tough. I couldn't see because my eyes had closed or speak because of a breathing tube. However, I can honestly say that I've never experienced the peace and presence of God like I did during that first week. All was dark, yet I felt safe and held. Like I had fallen so far, but then had been caught in the strongest safety net. This memory has been such a blessing in other situations over the years, knowing that God will never leave me and that his everlasting arms are there underneath it all. Verse 4, Jesus goes on to say that you're blessed when you feel you've lost what is most dear. Only then can you know the comfort and embrace of the one most dear to you. Loss happens to us all. It can be sudden and shocking and turn our world upside down. Loss of those we love, loss of our physical or mental capacity, loss of hopes and dreams for ourselves or others. It is individual and it is personal. The Bible speaks so often of God's heart for us. Comfort, comfort my people, are his tender words to us. I have longed to gather your children together, as a hen gathers her chicks under her wings. Come to me, all you who are burdened and weary, and I will give you rest. My mind goes to Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane, and in knowing he is soon to die, Jesus cries out that his soul is overwhelmed with sorrow to the point of death. He looks to both the presence of his Father and to his friends for his strength. And God wants us too to come to him and to be real with him in our grief. Loss can be a lonely place. Over time, we may feel more alone. How many times can we bring ourselves to tell others of the tears we have shed, the anxieties of another day, the pain that we are still struggling with? But in God, we have one with the capacity to bear all our sorrows. In fact, in the Bible, he repeatedly invites us to come. In the night too, for he is always there. He has no need to sleep. Before a word is on our lips, he knows it already, but no words are needed, for he hears the groans of our hearts. He brings people alongside us to love us, to listen and to help practically, professionals to care for us, and others to offer hope at just the right time. As I was thinking about this, I remembered a lovely lady that my burns consultant had asked to come and visit me towards the end of my initial hospital stay. I was feeling pretty low about losing my fingers, not knowing what the future would hold. She was just the right person I needed at that time. Having had very similar hand surgery for burns as a child, she now had great functioning little hands and was able to tell me of the full life that she lived. God gave me such encouragement as well as hope for my future. God also calls others to rise as a prayer shield around us, crying out to him on our behalf when we're unable to pray for ourselves. God's heart is to love and comfort us, and he chooses to do so in many different ways. I was thinking too about the garden for Jesus at this time of great anguish. Solid life with him, through the presence of the trees, perhaps birdsong, of the evening air and the sky. Is there a photo, please? God meets us here too, through the stripped back vulnerability of winter to the promise of spring. God can use the seasons to meet us in our pain. God works slowly and at a pace that our bodies and minds need to bring deep healing. It feels really important to say that God's comfort doesn't have a time limit in this life. And his promise for eternity is that our loss and pain will be no more. Teilhard de Chardin writes in his poem Patient Trust, above all, trust in the slow work of God. We are quite naturally impatient in everything to reach the end without delay. We should like to skip the intermediate stages. We are impatient to be on the way to something unknown, something new. And yet it is the law of all progress that it is made by passing through some stages of instability, and that it may take a very long time. In verse 5, Jesus continues, "You are content. You are blessed when you're content with just who you are. No more, no less. That's the moment you find yourselves the proud owners of everything that can't be bought." I find this very powerful and an invitation to move towards a place of acceptance. Over time, coming to the point of accepting something difficult in our life doesn't mean we have to like it or that it feels like a good thing. Let me repeat that. Over time, coming to the point of accepting something difficult in our life doesn't mean we have to like it or that it feels like a good thing. Arriving at a place of acceptance can come from a growing trust in Jesus and a hope that he has more for us and more for our lives, both within our loss and despite our loss. For God says, "I know the plans I have for you, plans to prosper you and not to harm you, plans to give you hope and a future." Next slide, please. We can find ourselves in a place of waiting for the light at the end of the tunnel, but that particular light may never come. Perhaps in acceptance, we are helped to start to notice the light within the tunnel. Perhaps even to see things to be grateful for there. This may become a place of trust. that God might bring treasure along our path that is unexpected, a contentment in our situation, and a way of living with him, a way of living through our wounds that is able to bring the love and compassion and understanding of Jesus to others. Next slide, please. I find Seeger Coder's painting of the Good Shepherd very helpful in considering what trust looks like. Jesus' hand is always outstretched for us, but sometimes it's the small child within us who teaches us to reach for it or to be carried. For it's a deep desire within our hearts that is often buried by self-reliance. When we allow ourselves to settle, to cease wriggling to get free, I can imagine the clear vision that might come from this place of trust and acceptance. In verse 6, Jesus tells us, "You are blessed when you've worked up a good appetite for God. He's food and drink in the best meal you'll ever eat." One day while sitting by the window, I was drawn to watching a blackbird in my garden. It was a hungry blackbird, busy, motivated to find larvae and worms in the grass, guzzling away back and back for more. And I sensed God say, "This blackbird is living out what it was made for." What about you? You were made with a spiritual appetite. How's that doing? How would it be if you were as hungry as this blackbird? And I felt his encouragement to come and eat and be satisfied. Jesus tells us often in the Bible to come, eat, drink, and have our fill. Meeting with him in the silence, in the Bible, in nature, with others, builds us up and brings inner healing, helps us to develop deep roots of faith, and it helps us to develop fruits of the Spirit to offer others. Growing our spiritual appetites takes discipline and the support of others, so let's reach out for help, encouraging and mentoring one another. In verse 7, Jesus says, "You are blessed when you care. At the moment of being careful, you find yourselves cared for." Each of our lives are unique with different seasons. Jesus asks us to be real and live and give to others from that place. It can take courage, and what we feel we offer can be dependent on where we are in our healing. I've noticed the times when all I can offer is allowing another to help me. But God has shown me that learning to receive from others is a huge blessing for both involved. Jesus will show you what your unique care for others can look like. It might be his love and empathy shining through the wounds of your own experience, his comfort and generosity that you have received being shared with others, his words that have been the balm to your sore hearts now being offered to others. And through it all, Jesus continues to heal us. We are often ministered to in surprising ways as we get alongside each other. Jesus suggests that our goal in life is to love God with our whole heart, soul, and mind, and to love others as ourselves. For he knows that in turn, the gift to us is love, care, and a fuller life. There we will find our heart's true purpose. In verse 8, Jesus says, "You're blessed when you get your inside world, your mind and heart put right. Then you can see God in the outside world." So this is a lifelong journey, the invitation of becoming more like Jesus. The Bible says, being transformed into the same image from one degree of glory to another. Wow. And this is God's Spirit working and changing us from the inside out. I've found taking time with Jesus in the stillness and in nature to be so restorative. When prayer isn't just me talking, but also coming to listen to the still voice of God. I spoke earlier about the slow work of God through our loss. But God in his love can also bring us emotional, spiritual, even physical healing over a much shorter period of time. Next slide, please. I first experienced retreat time, a more intentional setting aside time with God, when I was encouraged to have a half day set aside in my diary in my early 20s. What to do with this time? I headed out into the countryside with my Bible, a notebook, a pen, a couple of reflection questions, wondering what on earth I would do with 3.5 hours. Well, it wasn't actually anything about what I did, only that I tentatively offered this time to God. On this occasion, he did some really significant healing in me through nature and noticing Jesus in a particular Bible passage. It was to transform how I viewed and lived in the reality of my burn scarring and my understanding of beauty. I was blown away by God's tenderness for me. I can really recommend putting retreat time with God in your diary each month. Start small and know that God delights in your offered company. If you would like some help in getting started, ask one of the leaders or perhaps try a guided retreat day. God has a way of bringing joy and beauty into our lives in unexpected ways, as he helps us to take time to slow down and notice him in his world and in and through those around us. In verse 9, Jesus says, "You're blessed when you can show people how to cooperate instead of compete or fight. That's when you discover who you really are and your place in God's family." We are invited to partner as God's children to care for others and our world as he does. As we have known God's love, so we want to love in his name. With Jesus by our side, bringing in his kingdom of peace and justice, taking a stand for what is right and for those who need a voice. We each will have specific roles with the unique experience that God has woven into our lives. A Jesuit priest asks us the question, do you believe that you are a remarkable person who has an extraordinary treasure within you, the very life of God which seeks expression through you? Jesus goes on to say in verse 10 that if you follow me and seek to live in the ways of my love, there may be persecution and difficulty, but I will continue to bless you with all spiritual blessing in the heavenly realms. I will lead you forward and remain by your side into eternity. Next slide, please. So in finishing, this isn't a linear journey with Jesus, perhaps more an inner spiral of our becoming through our relationship with him. We are all at very different places in our lives, individual and personal. God knows us and loves us in each situation, and he invites us to trust the one who has gone before us, Jesus, whose suffering was for our sakes. He welcomes us to a place of loving companionship and deeper freedom, to a fullness of life that isn't determined by our health or our circumstances, a life where our enduring is interwoven with joy. So we're now going to take a few moments with a piece of music for reflection and silent prayer. Allow yourself to sit under God's loving gaze. You may notice that there's an image or a phrase that Jesus brings to mind from what has been shared. What might he say to you through it?